Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual education program at Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the program manager, and I welcome you to this workshop titled, Frankly Speaking About Cancer, Education and Employment for Young Adults Living with Cancer. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, Cancer Support Community South Bay's mission is to uplift and strengthen people impacted by cancer by providing support, fostering compassionate communities, and breaking down barriers to care. Our vision is that everyone impacted by cancer receive the support they want and need throughout their experience. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational programs are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join our community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, we ask you to keep your microphone muted to eliminate any distracting background noise. Please feel free to enter any questions into the chat function found at the bottom of the Zoom window at any time. Without further ado, I'll introduce our workshop speaker. Brittany Plut is a licensed clinical social worker, oncology social work certified at Torrance Memorial Medical Center, Hunt Cancer Institute. She also teaches mindfulness, yoga, and breath work in the South Bay. Thank you so much, Brittany, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Becca. And thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your day. I'm sure your busy lives to be here today. I like to acknowledge you for just really carving out time for yourselves, which I think is one of the most important things you could do really at any stage, but particularly in your cancer journey. You're taking time to really educate yourself, empower yourself, and I hope that you also feel in good community, knowing that you're not alone. And I think that when I was reading through, kind of preparing for today and the slides, and also just kind of the whole organization of the cancer support community, South Bay. I don't know if it's still the slogan, but I know it used to be, right? Like, so that no one faces cancer alone. And I can't underscore that enough, how well this organization carries out their mission. And today I'm hoping to let you know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone, you're not the only one. And that's why, we're having this presentation, because I know that oftentimes we feel as though we're, so unique in our situations, which I just want to, create that sense of comfort and community today. Again, I'm Brittany. I work as a licensed clinical social worker at Torrance Memorial Medical Center. So I've worked as an outpatient oncology social worker between here and Long Beach Memorial for I think the past 8 or 9 years. So I've had the privilege of really getting to know a lot of different survivors and their families. And so whatever wisdom I share is probably because of the people that I've worked with and have touched my life in that way too. So I just want to kind of get a feel for who's here, because I know that this presentation is for 15 to about 40-year-olds. So that's a lot of different stages in there. If you're comfortable, and again, this is an if, it's an option. If you don't mind saying either your age if you want to, or just like teen or young adult or however you identify, feel free. It's an option. And then, so that's one part. And then the other part is like, what are you most interested in learning about today? Is it like finances, education, employment? Just so I know, since it's such a big range. So please feel free sharing what you're comfortable with in the chat, so we'll know who's here. All right, Selena, thank you. Let's see here. Actually, I'm gonna not say names anymore. I'll just see. So we have someone here that was diagnosed at 39, currently 41. Okay. 38. Navigating survivorship with employer. Great. Job hunt, 36, 38. Oh, okay. So a lot of people are around the same, late 30s. Cool. All right. Let's see here. So around 36, 39, 38. Perfect. 33. Good to see you all. I mean, I'm telling you, I think one of the biggest things, and I'm sure you guys see this, right, is trying to find people kind of like that you identify with. Does that make sense? Like it's like in cancer support groups. I run a women's cancer support group, 45. I run a cancer support group, and I think one of the hardest part for the younger adults is being like, okay, I could benefit from speaking and learning from anybody, but like if someone's retired and at the end of their career, like they don't relate sometimes to the same situations I'm in life. Okay, so pretty much 30s and 40s. Good to know. All right, so you guys are in good company. We'll talk about work and school. Let's see here. All right, so let's get started. See where are my slides. All right, Nancy, thank you for sharing the slides. We can go to the next one, please. All right, 30s and 40s. This is very helpful, so I won't talk to you guys about middle school. All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, you can, yeah. Brittany Plut, have no financial relationships or affiliations to disclose. I just work at the hospital. All right, so the mission of Cancer Support Community, and Nancy will get into this a little more later, but again, is to strengthen people impacted by cancer, foster those compassionate communities, which we're doing right now. And again, right now, breaking down barriers to care, because community is stronger than cancer. And we know that like employment, particularly in education, can conflict with our care. So we want to make sure we empower you to get what you need to live healthy, successful lives throughout treatment. So the objective of this workshop, the agenda today is to talk about the objectives, common challenges with practical matters. It's kind of like a practical presentation, a lot of the details, but I tend to infuse a little bit of the psychology. And we're going to talk a little bit about developmental stages in this as well. How cancer impacts education and employment, tips on supporting your mental health, which is really important for me as a therapist, navigating education, employment, moving forward with education, employment, and resources. Next slide, please. So we are going to help young adults here navigate those transitions into education and employment. And we know transitions bring up a lot of different scary feelings sometimes and uncertainty, but particularly when you're dealing with a diagnosis and going through that transition and an adjustment, it's exponentially highlighted. We're going to help young adults here impacted by cancer to build their confidence, access resources, and connect with the other young adults. Next slide, please. So, setting the stage, again, you are not alone. 84,100 adolescents and young adults between the ages of 15 and 39 will be diagnosed with cancer in the United States in 2024. This accounts for about 4.2% of all cancer diagnoses. And unfortunately, the young adult number is trending upward, so slowly with the diagnosis of people tending to get diagnosed at younger ages. So we're also noticing with an increase in like colon cancers and rectal cancers and some breast cancers and such, we're having to actually adjust our psychosocial support services because cancer is impacting a whole different kind of community now, and with specific psychosocial challenges that we need to support them in, such as this presentation. So 35% of patients who were surveyed in cancer support communities, Cancer Experience Registry, reported that they are moderately to very concerned about changes related to work and school. Next slide, please. So young adult shared experiences. What I want to say before I read this slide is I was kind of digging back into my little psychology degree background. And what this presentation really makes me think of is this one psychoanalyst called Eric Erickson. I'm sure Nancy, you over there knew who I'm talking about. But this is a psychoanalyst that studied children at a young age and eventually worked with adults as well. But he talked about how at different key periods of our life, there's like little kind of like identity crisis, if you will say. It's kind of like what we're supposed to kind of accomplish at each stage from when we're little kids to the next stage when we're babies, we're toddlers, developing safety and trust, and eventually when we're in adolescence, learning more about our role in the world and our identity and who we are, moving into young adulthood and middle adulthood of trying to find love and connection and intimacy, and then later in older adulthood, kind of finding our purpose and kind of paying that forward. So why I say this is because how I kind of see this is that identity and role confusion phase, right? And just highlighting how important for like younger adults and emerging adults, this figuring out kind of like what we're doing in the world and who we are in the world and making that impact is highly important for our mental health, our sense of identity, and who we are in the world. So I say that because things like pursuing our higher education, pursuing jobs, they not only are, they do hopefully, make us some money as well so we could afford things in our lives, which is very important, obviously. And also, what role we occupy in life kind of reinforces how we feel about ourselves and who we are. And so I say that because it's a lot of work to get there, right? You've gone to a lot of different stages to get to this stage in this part of life. It's a very rich stage, very interesting, exciting, like scary, all the things. And in addition to that, with a cancer diagnosis, it could be highly disruptive feeling, to that stage that you've worked so hard for. And so this is when I've worked individually with young adults with cancer. It's like, oh yeah, I have chemo and my boyfriend and my teacher and my job. Like it's it's like as the cancer is, so disruptive to these busy lives and, all these exciting things going on. So why we say this is because continuing to, feel connected to what you do, what you study, who you are, is really important to actually, I think, your overall recovery of the cancer experience overall too, because you are not only your cancer diagnosis, let's put it that way. So we want to continue to equip you to continue to be your best self and feel like who you are in this world. That's why I think it's important. All right, next slide. So, I'm sorry, this one. So, young adult shared experiences. So, I'm sorry, previous. So, some examples of what might be going on for you is it seems like most of you probably graduated high school. Maybe you're in college or graduated from college or pursuing higher levels of education. Maybe you're in a technical school, figuring out kind of like what your path is that you're going to carve forward in life. You might be applying to jobs. I think someone here said they're on the job hunt, which again could kind of like change. Maybe you had one job and then maybe you're like, okay, I got diagnosed and I'm reconsidering like what my purpose is in this world. And I want to change my job. I don't want as stressful as a job. I want a more meaningful job. Or maybe it's like I need a job with like better accommodations. So just things to think about. Maybe, a lot of dating, right? Romantic relationships. That's the other part kind of in this young middle adulthood phase is jobs and relationships, right? Those are the two things people tend to be figuring out because the next stage is intimacy versus isolation. So we're social creatures and we're trying to like find our people. Other things might be like when people get sick, maybe they were living on their own and then it's like, oh my gosh, I have to move back to my parents' house because I need the help temporarily. Or, so there's a lot of different kind of things going on that could impact our daily life, but also kind of the way we feel emotionally as well. Maybe people live with a roommate, and it's kind of like this whole thing about dealing with their diagnosis with that as well. Becoming financially independent are some of the things are working on, or maybe you're supporting a family. I'm sure some people here are. Things like health insurance become a big deal with this population when I've worked with people because you typically need a job of some kind. You're not on your parents' insurance anymore, and so that does require either work or a partner or a family plan or or having to pay for it yourself. Parenthood, marriage, domestic partnership as well. Next slide, please. Um, so common challenges with practical matters. Young adults living with cancer may encounter challenges related to doctor's appointments, managing health insurance, financial assistance with medical expenses, navigating education, and/or employment. Because I think the interesting thing about oncology social work is what I'm learning is that every part plays off of each other, right? It's like the job influences the insurance, which influences your doctors, which influences, so they all kind of play off of each other. And that's why being an oncology social worker is so interesting because we actually do have to address the whole entire person, and that's why all this is so important. Yeah, so how cancer impacts education and employment. Next stage, please. Uh, navigating education and employment with a cancer diagnosis can be a significant challenge. When you were diagnosed, you may have been finishing up high school, enrolled in college, working full or part-time, seeking employment, taking some time off, as we discussed. And as for anybody, I will say at any age, even the 95-year-olds I've met with cancer and have started therapy for the first time, a diagnosis never comes at a good age, never at a convenient time, and is highly disruptive, typically for most people. Um, However, I think like in this specific population, when you're just kind of like getting your life off the ground and your independence rolling, I think it's really deeply felt. Interrupted school or career plans, resume gaps, or limited job experience. So maybe it's kind of like, well, oh, show me your work experience. And you're like, well, I was kind of like doing the hardest thing anybody could do. I was, taking care of my health and fighting for my life. And, I've done that. Can I put that on my resume? So you're doing a lot. It might just always not, we have to be creative with how we reflect that, I guess. So, physical and mental health challenge impacts. So maybe kind of there might be a delay in getting back to work because maybe you have high anxiety or PTSD, and you might need special accommodations to help you to navigate being back in a work setting, being back in kind of the real world. Changing relationships with peers. That's a whole thing, right? Coming out of a cancer diagnosis, like who shows up and who you're friends with, and like there's so many changes, and changes in priorities, which I think is really important because sometimes when people go through a diagnosis, they reconsider like so many things, and they're like, oh, maybe I want to have like a really meaningful career and reconnect with my passions or purpose or less stress or whatever. So all of these are key contributors to our emotional, financial, and social well-being, which all are connected, right? And our health overall. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Nancy. Thank you. So there's a TED Talk here. We could just listen to a few minutes of it. But this is a lawyer that also was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's passionate about educating people that they're still allowed to work during a diagnosis, and also what your rights are for, the fact that if you have a diagnosis, which is a protected class as a disability under the American with Disabilities Act. She's speaking from, I believe, Australia, but we will get into this a little bit later, but just knowing the fact that having a cancer diagnosis qualifies for like a legal kind of disability in that way. There are protections, and she actually found a lot of purpose in working throughout her cancer journey, and her ability to have her job and to find meaning and purpose and feel like who she was super important to her journey. And so her purpose is to now help educate survivors at any stage to know what their rights are so they could work if they so choose. So we'll just play this for a little bit, and we're going to leave the link for you in the chat to watch later, the whole thing. All right, you can play that, please.
It was June 2014. I was 30 years old, and I received a call from my doctor's office to say my test results were in. So I walked up to see her in my lunch break, and my doctor said she was very sorry to tell me that I had breast cancer. I didn't want to believe her, and at first I didn't. You see, I'm a lawyer and I needed some evidence. So I'm very embarrassed to tell you all that I stood up and I walked around to where she was sitting so that I could look over her shoulder and verify what was written on the page in front of her. Malignant carcinoma. But still not wanting to believe it, I said, now, malignant carcinoma, you're sure that means cancer? She told me she was sure. Back at work, I handed over the urgent things that needed to be done while I was having more tests to see if my cancer had spread. But at that moment, work wasn't my priority. I was thinking about how I was going to tell my family and friends that I had cancer, how I was going to answer their questions about how bad it was and whether I was going to be okay when I didn't know that myself. I was wondering if my partner and I would ever have an opportunity to start a family. And I was figuring out how I was going to tell my mother, who had herself had breast cancer when she was pregnant with me. She would know how I was feeling and have an idea of what lay ahead for me, but I also didn't want her to have to relive her cancer experience. What I didn't appreciate at the time was that work was about to play a huge role in my treatment and recovery. That it would be my co-workers and my job that would make me feel valuable and human at times when I would have otherwise felt like a statistic. That it would be my job that would give me routine and stability when I was dealing with so many difficult personal decisions and so much uncertainty, like what sort of breast reconstruction I was going to have. And at a time like that, you would think that I would turn to my family and friends for support. And yes, of course, I did that. But it would ultimately be my colleagues who would play a huge role in my day-to-day life. And they would be the ones to make me laugh. You see, we were a pretty close team and we shared a couple of really good in-jokes, like this time they overheard someone ask me how I got my hair so shiny and perfect, without knowing that it was, of course, a wig. And, you know, it was a very good wig and it did make getting ready in the mornings very easy. But in little moments like this, I appreciated what their support meant, and I wondered what I would have done without that network. I've spoken with so many people, women in particular, who haven't had the chance to have that network because they haven't been given the opportunity to work through treatment. And there are several reasons for this, but I think it mostly comes down to overly paternalistic employers. These employers want you to go away and focus on yourself and come back when you're better. And they use those kinds of phrases. And while these responses are well-meaning, knowing the benefits it brought me, it makes me incredibly frustrated when people are told that they couldn't or shouldn't work when it's something that they want to do and physically can do. So I started to look into what an employer is required to do when someone presents with a cancer diagnosis.
Well, we can keep it up for a little bit longer, Nancy. Thank you.
I discovered
cue
that
you in a
under
second.
Australian law, cancer is considered a disability. So if you are unable to perform your usual work duties, your employer is obligated by the Disability Discrimination Act to make reasonable adjustments to your working arrangements so that you can continue to work. What would reasonable adjustments look like for me? I knew the obvious impacts my diagnosis was going to have on work. Medical appointments would be scheduled during business hours, and I knew that I would need time off to recover from surgical procedures. Again, being a typical lawyer, I had done my due diligence on what to expect from treatment. Admittedly, a lot of that was through Dr. Google, perhaps not my best move, and I wouldn't recommend that. But while I was ready for all of the physical side effects, what really scared me was this thing called chemo brain. Chemo brain presents itself through memory loss, an inability to concentrate, and an inability to solve problems. And if this happened to me, I wondered how I was going to do my job as a lawyer. Would I be forced to leave work? And how could I possibly have a discussion with my manager about reasonable adjustments to my working arrangements when I didn't know how I was going to be impacted?
Make a pause right here,
I
please,
was
Nancy.
fortunate to have a supportive manager who was happy to see how things went.
All right. Well, I do recommend we'll drop that link for you guys and follow up with it. And Selena liked it. Yeah, it's she's good. I mean, it continues to
I was
go on
lucky.
for another
It was.
like 5-6 minutes. So want to make sure we have time to answer your questions and such within this presentation. But you could see how powerful, right, this presentation is. Seems like people are liking it. Yeah, absolutely. So next slide, please. Let's kind of build a little bit off of what she was saying. Let's see. So, and you could feel free to type any reactions to that it in the chat. I know we have some likes. If you have anything else you want to say about what kind of hit home for you, that would help me too to kind of know, and maybe others, what resonated for you. And as you do that, I'll talk. Continue to present. So young adults who are living with cancer while navigating education and/or employment may consider the following: setting boundaries for their mental health, how to ask for accommodations, as she was saying, at school and/or work, addressing gaps in their resume or transcript, accessing and using available support and resources. So the interesting thing I'm realizing more and more is that there actually are, like, because they're required to by law, quite a few reasonable, as they call reasonable accommodations at jobs and at schools and such. Just like if somebody had ADD or was on the autism spectrum and, had needed special test taking accommodations or whatever the case may be, in school or in college, those services do exist, right? And same with the physical disability. People actually, it's required. It's not just an option that they have to. I believe it's if you have whatever kind of a job you have, they have to be able to, when you have a disability, accommodate your needs to the capacity that you're able to perform. So maybe that might mean, I remember one of my teachers in grad school had polio, and he walked with crutches and he would get fatigue at times. And they actually, remember, he would kind of joke, and he was like, "Oh, but I get a couch." I'm like, "Cool." I'm thinking the one good thing about my disability is that I get a couch in my office. He was, being, facetious, but he also was like he's one of like the huge disability advocates and did a lot of good in this world. He was a professor there. But yeah, so there's that. I remember, for example, like in college, I knew somebody in the dorms that had like their own special fridge. He actually had cystic fibrosis and needed his medication refrigerated. So things like these, I mean, those are some kind of like practical, tangible things, but just in general too, there might be other options in ways that your employer can adjust to accommodate your needs as well. Okay, real quick. So want to get back to the chat for a second. So off of that video, I love what someone said about the sense of purpose work can bring. Absolutely. And meaning and purpose we're finding for getting through hard times, like going through a diagnosis, really is pivotal in our mental health. It helps kind of reduce that feeling of despair or also that lack of control. It kind of combats it by connecting us again to who we are, greater purpose, our identities outside of just this cancer. I think she comes off a bit privileged. Not everyone can work through treatment, even though they want to. That is a very good point, and I appreciate you saying that. Also, it's great that her coworkers were supportive, but not everyone feels comfortable sharing their diagnosis. Thank you for bringing that up. We could address that a little more detail. You are right. I actually did notice. I was like, wow, she works at a really nice place. The fact, and she's a lawyer too, is maybe she knew how to like advocate for herself and worked with other lawyers that maybe are aware of these laws and had to be. That's a very good point. Absolutely. And some people physically can't. So I don't want to make it seem like you have to, right? Like physically you cannot work through some people, are too ill to work through treatment. I guess at the end, when you kind of go further on in the video, which my apologies for not finishing it, there were kind of like some general takeaway points about just talking points to have with your employer. Let's see here. And there definitely is fear around sharing a diagnosis for many reasons. And you're right, some employers that I've worked with are not quite as gracious. So I guess the point of this is to really let you know what legally you're entitled to. So let's keep going here. All right, next slide, please. All right, navigating education and employment. The idea of navigating education and employment can definitely provoke feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. Absolutely. You have to have the roof over your head, right, to recover and go through treatment. In addition to plenty of other, anxieties that come with the diagnosis. It's important to figure out what makes you feel physically and emotionally secure. And also, as we're hearing, mentioning also what's feasible for the individual given their particular situation. So if you were to just kind of consider what stressors or concerns you have about managing work and or school as a young adult living with cancer, is there anything, if you want to share, you can in the chat, you don't have to, but if anything comes to mind, feel free to share. Like, what are the particular specific stressors that come to mind with work and school? Let's see. Let's see here. Somebody shared that after starting treatment, I told my employer I was not able to continue in my same position. I took leave and really not sure that I could possibly return, so I gave up my exact position because the career requires a lot of brain work, requires problem solving and meeting owners face to face. Chemo brain and anxiety is so mind changing that I cannot even imagine being back in my old self. And yeah, I'm sure in that video she could identify, it seems like, as well with the chemo brain, I think, and the anxiety absolutely post-treatment. So I don't believe on this presentation they include this resource, but I'm going to drop in the chat. Organization, a nonprofit called Triage Cancer. This is who I would probably, if a patient was coming to me with these kind of concerns specifically about their employer, I would probably direct them to Triage Cancer. It's a national nonprofit organization, and you could schedule one-on-one appointments with typically it's a lawyer or a legal representative, and they call you. You get like a 20-30 minute phone call, and they will not offer legal advice, but they will educate you so thoroughly on your rights that you feel like you have backing. And if you do need a lawyer in your state, they'll also refer you to a lawyer. But they'll equip you with, like, on your case specific issues. I would recommend making an appointment with them. Someone has a lot of appointments and not sure how and when to communicate that during the hiring process. Absolutely. Um, and I know that, like, when you're starting a new job, they ask that question, right? When you fill out all those millions of questions, one is like, do you have a disability, or have you had in the past? And you look at the list and it's like, somebody's probably had, I feel like most people have probably had something. It's like, they include so many things in that list. So, and it's, you don't have to state your specific disability, but just clicking that you have, I believe, kind of puts you in a category of, like, if you ever did need, there's a certain level of protections as well. So I would say probably when you're starting a new job, make sure you click that button, and so that it is documented and on file. So if you ever did need to kind of go back and kind of explain to them what's going on, that could be kind of like a safety for you. And having a lot of doctor appointments and not sure how and when to communicate that during the hiring process. In this situation, like, I don't know what your career is and such. I like to empower people to be selective with their sharing about their diagnosis. You're not required to disclose your diagnosis to anybody. I think that it's a personal decision, and it should be a choice, and not just kind of like, I think it feels better when you're being mindful, and this could be where counseling can come in, and to be really guided and intentional with who you share your diagnosis with and to what extent. There's plenty different ways of, creatively coming up with ways of sharing. When it comes to the appointments, I also probably, during the hiring process, I know it's tricky. I feel like I would probably go through the hiring process and try and get the job first and then see. I mean, some other people might have other thoughts. But depending on the job, you might even be at a place though where you can be open and about it. But I just want people, I think the most important thing is to feel like they're empowered and being conscious with their choices. There you go, Nancy. Cancer and Careers has some articles on this topic. Yeah. Always own, like, what you're sharing is a choice and it's your decision. And there's also HR, right? If you feel like there's ever any paperwork you need to fill out, such as FMLA or SDI, you always could go to HR. Hopefully the manager you could be honest with as well, but it's always a good outlet. Someone said, I'm an MSW. I'm scared of having triggers with clients. I assume this MSW also looking for a new job. And what do you tell them when you interview? Yeah. I don't know if this is like, I can't necessarily, like, tell people what to do. I think though that probably a lot of people are in the same boat. I would love to hear also what Nancy has to say. It appears that cancer support community has some suggestions on how to navigate this. My personal thought is like a general rule of thumb is to, share what you think is necessary and helpful, while being mindful of your right to not have to disclose every single detail. And also to make sure that you are getting proper support, I think, through this process is probably the most important thing, that you're having somebody outside of your work, like in counseling, or privately in your life, kind of coaching you through this step by step, because there are going to be a lot of specific questions that come up. Next slide, please. Tips to support your mental health when navigating education and employment. Over communicate with your peers and colleagues. Maybe this is kind of more when you have your job. Make sure that you are just kind of letting them know. I think maybe you don't have to share every single detail of what your medical diagnosis is, but I think communicating, right, the main thing is that you have to get your job done to the capacity that you can. So just keeping them in the loop of if there's any tasks that need to be done, but giving them some kind of a way to like plan ahead, finding ways of managing your stress, um, embracing some of this uncertainty mentally, checking in with yourself and loved ones, celebrating the small wins to keep yourself going, finding mental health support, and seeking professional help. So I think when it comes to honestly the kind of specifics, I do recommend definitely over communicating with your therapist or your coach to help you make conscious decisions throughout the process. And then the like triage cancer and a legal assistance if you have some of the bigger questions. Next slide, please. Education. All right, next slide, please. Navigating your role as a student while also being a young adult living with a cancer can be very complex and challenging. However, with the right strategies and support, it's possible. Next slide, please. Avoiding comparison, prioritizing your health, seeking guidance, asking for accommodations, and using your resources. So as we talked about, there are legal kind of requirements for accommodations for schools as well as employers. So I recommend looking into those specifically. We'll talk about some of them right now and also at your workplace. And that would probably be with like human resources or your manager can educate. Managers actually have to go through these trainings, just so you know, on like these specific situations. There's many laws and regulations that could support you with navigating education and cancer. Individuals with Disability Act governs the education of students with disabilities, including those with cancer, who may need special education and related services. It ensures that students with disabilities have the IEP tailored to their needs. So this is probably more if you're IEPs, I believe, are more when you're kind of like in middle school and high school and grade school to help students work out their specific needs. Section 504 of the Rehab Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in most public schools and colleges. It requires school to provide reasonable accommodations to ensure equal access for students. And I would personally veer in the same when it comes to a job. It would be discrimination, right? As long as you could, if you're applying for a new job, if you could fulfill the requirements of the job, that's the main thing, right, with a new job. So I think the main thing, again, mentally, is I want people to be in the driver's seat and to be aware of what they need to share and what they don't, and what's helpful and what's not helpful. And I also personally recommend you consider where you are mentally in your healing journey and kind of like what you could tolerate sharing. You know what I mean? Because maybe you're further out and you've gotten good therapy and you're like, oh yeah, I could share about this and to this extent, to this place. And then, okay, that's good. That's kind of like my boundary. And this is where I'm processed. But maybe it's fresher for somebody, or maybe like someone said, you're going through treatment and you're just like, it's just too much. It's too raw, So, and maybe you just need to maybe you really need more support on the outside in counseling, and you need to really find a way to create that boundary and barrier of taking care of yourself. And then maybe if it is a really triggering job specifically, maybe that has to be a conversation with your manager on like, can I do this right now? Are there any other options for me? Can you put me kind of like, I know on the floor in nursing, sometimes they have like, patient bedside nurses, but sometimes there's other jobs. Maybe there's something you could do that's less constantly triggering for you? Because I would be concerned if something's constantly triggering and digging stuff up for an individual. Is that healthy for you too? So it's kind of like just have these fluid conversations with people you could trust and really check in with yourself and be honest. Okay. American with Disability Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities and requires employers, businesses, and public entities to provide reasonable accommodations and accessibility for people with disabilities. I think the ADA is probably one of the most, well-known and important things to know about. Just remember the ADA is on your side. Employment. Next slide, please. It can be hard to talk about cancer in the workplace. Communication is key. Next slide, please. All right, some strategies. So, addressing gaps in the workplace. So, maybe you had to take some time off, or maybe you graduated college and you're like, oh, I didn't get any work experience, whatever it may be. Cover letters are a good way of telling a story. And I feel like I recommend in general always having a cover letter to make your resume stand out. You're kind of tying it all together, right? Like why you want this job, why your life experience can contribute to that. Also, again, I recommend being mindful of like how you share it, how you frame it, what you're comfortable with, and I would keep professionalism in mind too. What do people actually need to know? What is not really necessary? Expanding on your soft skills. So soft skills could be kind of more like empathy and communication and compassion, depending on what kind of job, right? You would want to look at what kind of job you're applying for and see what skills you've learned along the way. Like other skills might be more technical and such, but what are the soft skills? How do you relate to others? Have you learned to be a better problem solver? Maybe some people got really good at navigating the healthcare system, and that's a strength. So just don't underestimate all the things you've gone through that you've gleaned and gained during your journey. Accommodations at work. Maybe you work reduced hours, temporary or part-time jobs. I think a big one that she ends up talking about as well in her video is just like after 2020, it's just like virtual is so common in so many jobs. So maybe, either your employer offers you like hybrid or virtual, or maybe you just apply for those kind of jobs now. I have a friend that has a kind of like a chronic illness, and for her, the biggest thing was like, as long as it's remote, I don't really care like for her, that was like what was most important. So, I think a big part of this is just being honest with yourself too, and like it's kind of all coming down to me even talking through this presentation of, I know it's a big part, right? Of like we need to pay the bills and have insurance, and that's super important. And one step aside above that or aside in addition to that is like, how can you take care of yourself throughout this whole process, right? Like if I'm in a setting where somebody is so horrible to me and my manager, even, you do have your rights and such, like really take a hard look on maybe um, what, you do your best to try and work with them, I would think, and what they offer, but then also like if it's not good for you and the stress, this is maybe just a kind of a step in the mental health direction. Really consider what's good for you in the long run as well. And I know that does take, sometimes a minute. It takes all of us a minute to find our career over time, but just things to keep in mind. So maybe when you're searching for a new job, though, the people that are job hunting, you want to, as much as you want to be hired and like interview, you're also interviewing your employer. Never forget that. You're interviewing them, and maybe your questions are expanded, such as like, your questions change now. Like it's not just like, tell me about the job, but like, what is the work environment like? What is the desk? Um, what is time off like? How do you encourage, how does your organization view self-care, and how does this organization promote employee satisfaction and well-being? So maybe those things start to become more important for you. Seeking guide, prioritizing your health. See, your health and well-being comes first, right? Like I know how important we get in our heads. We get like obsessed with getting a good job sometimes, and it's like so important, but then you have a health crisis and you're like, shoot, the main thing is actually my health, right? Like everybody's grounded here. It's just like, actually, like my health is the most important. So I know there also could be that sensation of being a young adult, kind of like, wait, but I just want to go back to, normal and all of that. I want to have this job, but just always keep your health in mind, your self-care. then you can always seek human resources, legal professionals, and such. Nancy, I'll be stopping in a second. I know you still have some some slides to do, so feel free to interject if I'm going too far. Just real quick. Okay, policy spotlight, the ADA, Disability Act, we talked about that, FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, which allows employees to take unpaid job protective leave for family medical reasons. The GINA prohibits employers from using an individual's genetic information, including information about their predisposition to cancer, in employment decisions. So it is a protected class. Moving forward in education and employment. Next slide, please. Asking for accommodations in education and employment. So I do think that people end up becoming greater advocates for themselves. In all honesty, I think that's kind of where things end up going. It's a balance of when to advocate and when to kind of sit back and like take care of yourself. So identify what your needs are, get your documents in place, understand what your rights are, contact the right person and communicate clearly, and then follow up. Next slide, please. Managing relationships. Cancer can change relationship dynamics with friends, coworkers, classmates, neighbors. I think the main thing, again, with all of this, because we're identifying that it is a lot, is having the proper support system in place, such as a group of cancer support, a therapist, whoever your network is, because when you're going through it or newly out of it, like there are going to be a lot of things. So make sure you have support in place. Next slide, please. Support in education and employment, considering what conversations you need to have to ensure a smooth transition for you and others as you make progress towards your goals. Next slide, please. I know we're kind of running out of time. Finding financial assistance. You could definitely in school look into some financial assistance they do. If you do a search, you could add that into your list of searches online. I think they have some resources at the end of this slide as well. Next slide, please. Building your resilience. I think this is all kind of comes back to like getting the right coping skills to know how to navigate when you get triggered in the workplace, as we were talking about. So building your resilience, your mindfulness, your self-compassion, all the coping skills, your DBT, your CBT, all of it, you can build your toolbox. And also maybe considering a purpose-driven education and career paths that are just going to amplify, really going to highlight who you are, and also really create satisfaction for you as well. Next slide, please. It'll help you shine. So continuing to cultivate purpose in your experience of cancer is really important. And I think that this also comes through good therapy too. Sometimes people could find like a post-traumatic growth aspect is that people with cancer, I do oftentimes find when they choose that path of growth, they, with the proper support and counseling, they can actually find really beautiful parts about their self and their life and make a meaningful impact. So there's no right or wrong way, no right answer in the search of meaning and purpose after your diagnosis, but I do encourage you to engage in the psychological process if you haven't already. Next slide, please. So thinking about purpose, let's see. Just considering what brings you joy, happiness, how much you want to identify with your cancer diagnosis in your employment, or maybe it's just kind of something that you put here and then you're focusing on the other parts of your life that are bringing you joy. Maybe that's the kind of career you need in that particular moment. I could probably get into this more. I know we're getting short on time, but Nancy, how are we doing? You probably have to get started, right? Oh, you're next. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank
yes.
you.
So
Yeah.
the slide here talks about the power of community support. And you'll see the quote says, I started attending DC young adult cancer community meetups. I've met people who are just like me, and it's made a world of difference. And what this is highlighting is just how important it is to find your community. And really, that's what we're striving for at Cancer Support Community South Bay, is a place for our young adults and all cancer patients to be able to connect and feel like they belong. Let's see. It is not advancing. There we go. Let's see. So these are some resources and advocacy organizations for young adults with cancer. So there is 1330 Cancer Connect. It helps teens and young adults build a peer community. There's the Cactus Cancer Society that provides online support programs, and it also includes a monthly video hangout. Cancer and Careers is the one that I referenced before, but it empowers and educates people with cancer to thrive in their workplace. There's a lot of really great advice and articles, including some interactive tools, and they have a really great yearly conference as well. Then there's the Cancer Hope Network that provides highly personalized and supportive connections at any point in your cancer journey. And then there's First Descendants. This is an organization that they will organize outdoor adventures specifically for young adults. The Expect Miracles Foundation. This organization provides financial resources for young adult survivors, and they also do this through grants in a couple of different categories. There's Stupid Cancer that provides digital in-person opportunities for loved ones and patients to connect. And Triage Cancer is the one that Brittany mentioned. They provide free education on legal and practical issues regarding employment. And then let's see, we've got the Young Adult Survivors United. This offers support for young adults with cancer. And the Young Survivors Coalition does the same here. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is how community is stronger than cancer and finding some coping strategies that empower everybody. So we can do this through some local resources. These are ones that are closer here to the South Bay, LA, Southern California region. So there's the Family Reach, there's the Patient Advocate Foundation, Cancer Care, which provides a number of wonderful workshops, but also support services. And then We Spark. They provide information as well, and they can also provide some support groups. Children's Hospital LA, City of Hope, the Young Adult Survivors at USC, as well as UCLA Health Radiation Oncology. All of these hospital-based systems provide support programs for young adults with cancer. And here are some of the ones that are cancer support community related. These ones can all be found on our headquarters website, but these are several of them discussing managing cost of care, balancing work in cancer, etc. And this is our helpline. This is available through our headquarters. It's staffed by community navigators and resource specialists. They've all had extensive training in helping people affected by cancer. And there's a number of different services that they can provide on our helpline. So one is connecting callers to local or national resources, counseling support groups, lodging, transportation, etc. They can also help with treatment decision-making education. They do this through a program called Open to Options. There's also access to an online screening tool, the Cancer Support Source, which really it sort of helps to identify where you might be struggling or needing additional support. There's bilingual Spanish navigators available. There's a web chat option. And there's some specialized information, for instance, on pediatric oncology, finance and treatment, CAR-T, etc. And just really overall guidance on the full scope of all the resources cancer support community has to offer. We have a cancer experience registry through our headquarters. It's an online research study that aims to understand the emotional, physical, and practical impact of cancer. And the registry website is here on this slide. The grassroots community really has to do with how cancer support community advocates in order to get up-to-date information on key issues, being part of the network that interacts with Capitol Hill and other policymakers on important issues. And it's really a place to have your voice heard alongside thousands of other voices of patients. My Lifeline is another cancer support community tool. It's available in English and Spanish, and it's set up to connect with others, find support and hope, and exchange ideas and stories. They have discussion boards, and you're able to meet other people with similar diagnoses and age groups. And the website there is www.mylifeline.org. So now we have some question and answers. Brittany will field questions. I can field some as well. And I am going to put up next here on the screen our evaluation. So if you would be so kind, this particular presentation was brought to you by a grant called Frankly Speaking About Cancer. And we do have to have a number of evaluations turned in order for us to get credit. So if you can scan the QR code with your phone and take this brief survey, we'd appreciate it. But in the meantime, if you want to use the chat box feature, then Brittany, if you want to field the chat box for questions.
Sure. Sure. And I see there already. Thank you, Nancy. So many resources, and I assume that those are going to be emailed to the participants or the slides. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. And just kind of looking at the questions, taking a minute to actually like read them and look over them and just kind of reflect. I know, for example, somebody mentioned that they're kind of looking for jobs and afraid of like having triggers with clients and such, and kind of what do I share, what do I not share in a job interview, and some of these other questions too. I think this is kind of just like that process of where you check in with yourself and see like what's safe for you and what your comfort level is and how healed and processed and such you are in your personal part of the journey. And also kind of like what I would say my takeaway is kind of like, how do you spin it into a strength, if that makes sense? So during a job interview, if you like are a social worker and you're applying and stuff, and if it's something that you're you're in a part of your cancer journey where you're like, hey, when it's selective sharing, right? If you feel ready, if you feel like you're ready to answer questions that people are going to bring back to you. But how can you showcase, right? In any interview, when we're giving examples, we want to keep it professional and we showcase, well, I went through this experience and it just makes me more connected with my mission of wanting to like serve others. Or, I've learned how to actually advocate for myself, how to take care of myself. And that's what I want to, this is why I would be good at my job, essentially. I think when you could highlight, like it said in there, kind of what you got out of your journey and how that kind of the positives. And again, what they call this term, there's post-traumatic stress, but there's also a post-traumatic growth that occur for people with, I think, again, the proper counseling, reflection, and such of what have you gained and how could you bring that as a strength in your life and to this job and whoever you serve. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Nancy, but I think overall it comes down to kind of your personal selective decisions, where you are in your journey. Yeah, and just being mindful of sharing when you're ready. And then, is there anything we didn't answer? Someone asked, what's your advice on coworkers that ask too many questions? I've seen this before with some of my patients, and also coworkers that once they do, yeah, I know, right? They're nosy and then they want to get the answers and then they show no compassion. I think you unfortunately learn really quick who you could share stuff with and who you can't. And there's boundaries, right? You're not required to share this stuff with your coworkers. If you happen to have a certain coworker that you feel really comfortable with and you feel like you could confide in them, that's great. I feel like usually it's again, like more, it has to be on a selective individual basis. When people ask too many questions, I think that's also what you could explore in counseling is, what questions am I comfortable answering and what ones do I just kind of not answer? And again, this is all consciously, what you making the decision, and it's just called a boundary, right? Like if you're still experiencing the emotional impact of some of these questions, like you're in treatment or like what's happening, what stage are you at, and you don't even know like where you are and you're waiting for a scan or something. Um, I'm totally give you permission to kind of make just kind of a little blanket statement and just be like, we're good. Or I'm well taken care of. I have a great team. Just kind of deferring it to something like that. I'm in good hands. If it becomes too much too on the coworker end, you can always talk to your boss. It shouldn't be. How do you negotiate for fair compensation even though your capabilities are reduced, right? I know that's always an interesting one, even to negotiate for a raise or whatever it may be. I don't know if this is fair compensation if you already have a job or if you're applying for a job, but if you do have a job, I know that's always kind of tricky to ever kind of request that promotion or what it may be. But I think at the end of the day, too, it's kind of just like spinning it into like what you add to the organization. Maybe they are more soft skill things, or maybe it's, what you plan to contribute. Maybe you could focus your time on creating a new role for yourself at the company. Maybe you pitch a new role, you create a PowerPoint slide and you fully are just like, sure, you have to be honest with yourself. I can't do this technical stuff. My brain's not fully functioning right now, but you're like, oh, wait, I think the company actually, you take a step back, you see how else you could contribute to the company and maybe create a plan, pitch it, see what happens. I've been so again, sorry. So with the soft skills, again, it's right. Like, how could you be creative, problem solving? You might not have, like, if you don't have your logic, your brain, your quick math skills to always lean on, it's okay. I want to also put into this conversation self-compassion. Like, you're going through a lot and take a few deep breaths, add the yoga, the breathing, Google the term self-compassion, practice all the meditations, give yourself some credit. And because we're usually pretty hard on ourselves when we're going through hard times, but if you could find any ways to soften as opposed to getting more hard on ourselves when things are hard, actually when we soften our bodies and do these self-compassion practices, we tend to actually come up with our own ideas. It's really interesting. So please Google self-compassion at the end of this. The mindful self-compassion. I've been super avoidant of all these conversations. Yeah, I'm still with the company, but I no longer have a position specifically or maybe a new role. Okay. Well, if there's avoidance coming up, it's probably like some fear and anxiety and not knowing how to handle it. So I would be mindful of avoidance in any situation, whether it's applying for a job, a relationship, a this, or that. Like we tend to, we don't want to be avoidant for too long because then I think what happens is we just like stuck, So if you're having avoidance of conversations and stuff, I would recommend seeking support and counseling to manage that anxiety. Because, this is how you move forward, right? For sure. And it's not easy at all. But I believe that if you had the proper therapeutic support, you would be able to come up with some solutions so that you could move forward in that next step of your life and take that action. And I bet when you took that action, you would start to mentally feel better overall. Um, that's what I think in general. Avoidance tends to actually be like, there's a whole therapy like acceptance and commitment therapy really addresses avoidance because that's what's kind of like in the way of like what's going on now and then our next step essentially. So if that anxiety is coming up for you, it's very common, especially when we have these traumatic experiences. Please seek support individually for that so that you could move forward with your life and be mentally happier and healthier. Okay, Cancer Support Community has a young adult survivors group that meets 2 times a week. At least you know you're not alone with some of these questions. I want to thank you guys for being so open and vulnerable with your questions, and hopefully some of them you got some thoughts, different perspectives. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. We want everybody here to feel like they have support. So whether you're reaching out, obviously, to cancer support, seeking their services, you're welcome to I could put my email in there if you have any follow-up questions as well. If anything comes up for you later, feel free to reach out. We don't want to leave you hanging alone. So
Thank you so much, Brittany.
yeah.
I just wanted to correct, our young adult survivors group meets 2 times a month.
Oh, sorry.
And, but Brittany put in her email there, Brittany Plut at tmmc.com.
Mhm.
And we want to thank you so much for sharing all of the information, the wealth of knowledge of you having worked with clients for so many years with cancer. So thank you everybody for attending. I hope everyone has a really wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.